So I'm here with David, and he did something crazy last year. He took his whole family, his family of 6, and he moved to a little island in the Caribbean Sea off the coast of Mexico. What's the name of the island again?
Cozumel.
Cozumel. Okay. And the reason I want to talk to you is because I've been dreaming about doing something very similar, and I want to know kind of the ins and outs. Mostly, I want to know all the bad stuff, actually.
Right. The juicy parts.
Exactly, because it's so easy to just fantasize about things, and I know that the lived experience, there are all these little things that you might take for granted about living in America, or that you don't even consider when you're trying to find another place to live. So that's the kind of stuff I want to get out of you if I can. Why did you choose this island in the first place, would you say?
We weren't really sure where we wanted to go. So we kind of zoomed all the way out on Google Maps and just looked at the whole planet as an option.
Yeah.
Some of the places that we considered, Bali and Indonesia, New Zealand, of course, the Mediterranean and Europe. Cost of living kind of ruled out some of those. Like New Zealand is not an inexpensive place to live.
Right.
Cost of travel was another. So Canada wasn't so bad, but Europe or further, when there's 6 of you, you're like, okay, what's going to cost us $8 to $10 grand to get there?
So the cost of living where you chose, was that a factor? I mean, it sounds like it depends on where you live.
It was a factor. I will say that has been not a disappointment, but different than our expectations. Of course, we researched it, online as much as we could, but we had talked to a couple of people that lived here. What we didn't take into account is that they were no kid expats. Right. So they were willing to live for dirt cheap. Like they were telling us, yeah, you can get a great place for like $200 a month. And we're like, oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. You can, but not when there's 6 of you. Yeah. So really our monthly rent looks about the same as the US. The rest of our cost of living is very cheap. So, I mean, if you want to eat out, it's a few dollars for a few people to go out and eat out.
So what about food and water safety? I mean, I know that's a concern in some countries. Is it, Can you drink the tap water? Is it like when you go out to eat, are you worried about food poisoning, or is it just like?
Everybody drinks bottled water. Even the locals, they get the big 5-gallon. So we don't drink the tap water. I do brush my teeth with it. Like I'm not terrified of it. I just don't want to, swallow it.
I see.
As far as food, it is weird. In the US, there's very high standards for food safety. Like people wear gloves and hats and stuff. My favorite place to eat here, like they're literally just touching the meat with their bare hands, slicing it off. And the first few times I was like, that's very odd. But I thought about, when you go to a friend's house, they're touching their food with their hand. And that's all these people are doing. So
right. And it's very funny, like how high standards are. But then you go on a camping trip and the standards go out the window. We actually did a big move. You talked about Dallas and how you spent most of the year inside because it was so hot and there was nothing to do and all this stuff. We lived in North Dakota.
So the opposite.
It's the opposite, but it's the same results. Like you're basically living inside a space station for 8 months of the year, and then even when it warms up, there's not a whole lot to do. You're living in the middle of a bunch of farmland. So what are you gonna do? I dream about Florida or even going farther, like a tropical island or something. Mm-hmm. And we kind of compromised by going just south. So what did you have to do to prepare?
We wanted to be able to move without debt. Of course, we had racked it up, like everyone else does. About 9 years ago, we eradicated most of our credit card debt before my son was born. Of course, we had our house, vehicles, student loans, things like that. And so when we sold our house, we paid off everything that was remaining.
So it's right off the mainland of Mexico. Do you find yourself having to go to the mainland a lot for like shopping or hospitals or anything like that?
There's numerous hospitals here. There's a Sam's Club on the island.
Wow.
It is smaller than like what we were used to back home, but has many things that we expect to see. There's a couple different grocery stores. One of them is very expat centered. We felt good. Like there's hospitals and things here. We even have a doctor that comes to our house regularly, and it's still cheaper than we would have paid for a doctor's visit back home.
Wow, he actually comes. It's like the
Yes.
old-fashioned family doctor thing.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's
And we've actually
amazing.
hung out with him. Like we've gone to dinner with him and gotten tacos. And
I mean, you weren't even planning on staying with your current job, right?
I kind of had always joked with my boss, say, the only way I would leave is if I convinced my wife to move to a tropical island. About 4 months before we were moving, I said, hey, do you have a moment to talk? He's like, you look serious. Is it the talk? I said, it is. Of course, he went pale white and we sat down. First words out of his mouth is, which island you moving to?
Awesome.
So I go, Cozumel. He's like, oh my gosh, you're serious, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. By the second sentence, he goes, you just want to work remote? I'm like, yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
Well, I mean, and a lot of people are finding themselves obviously in the working remote situation now.
Yeah.
Um, and that's one reason why I was interested in getting into web development, is because there is that possibility. I mean, if you have a reliable internet connection, you're good to go, basically. So that, I mean, you just got a head start
Oh, yeah.
from the rest
Yeah,
of
I had a year ahead of everybody.
Yeah. Now, what is your status? Like, you're maintaining your citizenship, is that right?
Yes.
I mean, so do you have to, what does that mean? Do you have to come back to the US for a certain amount of time to maintain that?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so
we actually reached out to the Mexican consulate in Dallas and told them, hey, here's what we're looking to do. We're not 100% sure if this is a long-term or not. They were very friendly, very easy to work with. They basically said, go on a tourist visa. In Mexico, you have 6 months per visit on a tourist visa. The next step would be to go for a resident visa, which you don't have to leave every 6 months.
I've looked into like moving to Italy. Italy is very appealing to me, but
Yeah.
that's one of the worst things I hear about it, is just the bureaucracy, and it's impossible to get anything
Yeah.
done in the just government red tape stuff. But it sounds like Mexico has been easier to work with.
It did take a couple of visits to figure out what forms they wanted. Each person had a different form. So it's kind of like a lottery is to figure out which form they actually want. So when you come back, that person was okay with it.
It's the same working with the DMV. We were just trying to register
Yes.
our car, and we had to go back like 3 times because we had a different person and they each wanted something different. And yeah, it's just the same no matter where you go. So you're still paying US taxes. Are you a resident of any state?
Of Texas, yeah.
Okay, so, and they don't have income tax anyway, right? It's just
Correct.
taxes. Okay, that's nice. Because another thing I've looked into is full-time RVing. Like, I have all kinds of ideas, but then those questions of what about your state of residency? What about taxes?
Yes.
What about, here's another thing, health insurance. So what do you do for health insurance?
So the day that my boss's boss asked to work remote, I told my wife, and her response, I would never have guessed. However, every woman I've told, they all like, that's the first question. She's like, oh, good, we get to keep our insurance.
Yep. Well, it is different when you have a family,
It is true.
You mentioned that you were thinking about starting your own business. So did you actually have kind of a plan of what you were going to do then?
Yes, and I say it now, and we kind of laugh about it. So we are also full-time photographers. Like we do that professionally. We did events, weddings, family photography back in the States, in addition to the fact that I work as a software architect during the day. And so we were going to come here, which is a tourist destination, and do full-time photography. I'm so glad we did not do that because they've not had any tourists for 3 months, and that would be awful.
That's so true. Oh, that would have killed you. Oh, man.
Yes.
But you could still use your photography, obviously, for your blog. I mean, you can take beautiful pictures of where you're living. You started your blog to talk about technical stuff. Is that right?
Yes.
But then this is taken off?
Yeah. So, what do you do during a pandemic? You start new projects, I guess.
Yeah.
So in the past 3 months, I made my older three kids start their own blogs. But I also started it, and really it was more to talk about technology and things that are interesting to me in that respect. And I really just posted the story of how we got here because I thought, oh, people probably want to know who I am. But everybody's responded so well to that. I was like, maybe I should post more about this.
Yeah, that's the great thing about getting feedback, just putting something out there and seeing what
Yeah.
the feedback is, what people are actually interested in, trying different things and see what gets the biggest response. So you homeschool. Now, is that a recent thing or have you always been homeschooling?
So our oldest will be going into 8th grade in the fall. And we started when she was going into 2nd grade. So that'll be, was it 5 years that we've done it so far? Our daughter excelled in math in 1st grade. She wasn't great on the reading at that time. She's fine now. She's 8th grade. She reads all the time. But all the focus went on her reading and they just kind of disregarded math. And she was good. They're like, we don't need to work on it. I'm like, actually, I want to work at it. She's naturally good at those. Let's push that. And so that was really one of the reasons why we pushed to move to homeschool. We want her to excel in her strengths as opposed to always focusing on her weaknesses.
Right. And if it's something she's good at and that she's interested in, who knows how far it'll take her.
The girl I dated is for my wife.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to homeschool. And that was the thing. We're like, okay, we don't see eye to eye. So we broke up. And so when I dated my wife, we made sure the other never wanted to homeschool and be those crazy people. And here we are.
Yep.
Just completely lost our minds.
Well, it is becoming more mainstream. Well, obviously now, since everybody's homeschooling.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, right now everyone is.
So everyone gets a little taste of what it might be like. What are some of the roughest parts?
Our families were actually great. This was bizarre to every one of them. I don't know. We had any family member who was like, "What a great idea!" Our friend group was very split. So we had some friends that were amazing. They're like, of course, we're going to miss you guys. We love you so much. We're in our life till we die, but so good for you. We're so excited for you. And like, those people stand out in here. And then people that you're really close to, a lot of them made it about themselves and it was very hard. Of course, everyone assumed because of my age that it was a midlife crisis. That group of people, we didn't break ties with them. They finally calmed down and stuff. But it did help us to see who can be super encouraging. And those are the people that we share more with our life now.
I mean, we've thought about this, leaving all our friends and family in North Dakota, how it really is kind of like a rejection of their lifestyle, basically. Just saying,
yes.
Exactly. Just saying, you know what, this is not what I want. I'm going to find something else. And just by making that decision, you are indirectly judging them for their decisions to be there.
That's exactly how they take it. Yeah. Exactly.
So even though everyone has to judge for themselves what they want, what they don't want, what's the best for their family, we had this moment where we looked around and we're like, if we stay here, we know what our life is going to be like. If we stay here, we're going to end up getting a super cheap rundown house in a small town in North Dakota and going to like potlucks now and then and snowmobiles or four-wheelers because they like doing that. Maybe they go ice fishing or, all this stuff that we weren't interested in. We're not huge hockey fans. Or,
very much nailed it. And, depending on where you're at in the US or wherever in the world, I guess, if you stay where you're at, you're right. And that to a lot of people, that's super comforting. Like they want that predictability, which is great for them. Like, yeah, you do you. It does not bother me that people want to do that. But you're right. Like if you look at that and you're like, well, this is what it looks like if I stay here X amount of time. You have to decide, do I want this for me or do I not? And either answer is okay. They're both great. It just depends on what you want. Obviously, we're the people that look at it like, I don't want that thing. I want some other thing. It might be worse, but I want the adventure that comes with it.
Exactly. And the friends I saw around me, they were really happy. I mean,
right?
and I'm really glad that they're really happy. Like, I wouldn't tell them to leave their home and go south. It's not a judgment on them at all. It's just our responsibility to know ourselves and know
Hmm.
what will make us happy. And it's not necessarily what the people around us are doing.
Exactly.
So anyway, and sometimes it means doing something crazy and risky that looks like a midlife
Well,
crisis.
and you know what's interesting is I think a difference is, if you decide that's the life you want, often people are deciding this is what the life I want indefinitely. So they assume when you make a decision like this to move south, to wherever you're at or wherever we're at, they assume that we're making the same indefinite decision. And you might not be like, we're not trees. I can get up and move anytime I want.
It'll be easier the second time around because you've already handled the debt and all the stuff
Mhm.
and all the tearful goodbyes and or I mean
Yes.
it'll be easier the second time around and fewer unknowns. It's always
Yeah.
harder. The first time you do something is always the hardest, like having a baby or
Yes.
first time's always
Oh yeah, the first baby is terrifying. By the fourth one, you're like, oh yeah, we're having that baby this week, so let's go take care of that.
right.
Oh, so 2 days before our move, I was sitting at work. It was my last physical day in the office. I was at a team meeting, and it kind of hit me. What am I doing to my family? And like, I've looked at it online now. It was actually a medical panic attack. We moved out of our house the next day. We had two flights. We had the first one that we came, just my wife and I, to figure out where to live.
Right.
Found a spot, flew back for 2 days, got
Mhm.
the kids that came. But when we got on the plane with the kids and sat down, there was this amazing sense of relief and calm. We're like, we did it. Once the plane took off, you're like, this is it. We finally made this one. We had looked forward to that exact moment for like years. We sat down and like, it was so exciting. From the rest, like our stress just melted away at that point.
you know it's one of those things where even if you got there and it just fell apart, and everything went wrong and uh, even just going through what you went through to get on that plane was a huge accomplishment.
As you're preparing, there's always that question, can we actually do this? Do I have what it takes to do this thing? And once you get there, like, yeah, I can do this. I could do other crazy things too, probably.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you're right. You learn a ton about yourself. You get confidence that you can do stuff that seemed impossible before.
Right. And the world doesn't seem so huge anymore, right? I mean,
Oh,
you
yeah.
you moved out of the country and you could do it again, and it's just the world isn't as big and scary as it seems if you just stay in one place, I guess.
To that point, like one of the things that we were excited about is our kids will just have this built into their DNA now that you can do things like this.
Hmm.
Um, there's so much that they've learned that they would never experienced if we had stayed back there.
What would you do differently if you were going to do it all over again with the experience you have under your belt?
I would try to convince my wife to tell no one until we actually got here.
That was the
I
hardest
think,
part, was the opposition.
I think so. Yeah, I think that was the hardest part for me is just people that were super close to you that were either kind of belligerent or just disappeared. Like that was heartbreaking, I think.
It hurts. It hurts.
It
And
does.
I'm sure that's why they reacted that way too, is because
Absolutely.
they were hurting too. So, and what are the 5 stages of, aren't there 5 stages of grief? There's
Yes.
it's like denial versus denial, then it's like
Denial,
anger.
bargaining, anger,
Yeah, something like that, and then just depression.
overeating's got to be one of them.
Yeah, yeah, overeating, right. That's part of the depression stage, I think. Yeah. So yeah, so I'm sure they were going through that grieving process too, which is
Absolutely.
it's unfortunate that there wasn't a healthier way to go through it, I suppose. But thanks for chatting with me today. Maybe we'll even have to do it again sometime. This has been really
Awesome.
interesting.
I'd love that.